Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Spidey Stash. My name is Bruce Wechtenhiser, and I've been collecting Spider-Man memorabilia and reading Spider-Man comic books for the last 53 years. Pretty much a lifetime with Spidey. And on Spidey Stash, we will talk about different pieces of memorabilia each time I'm here with you. About a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, Brad Douglas, our fearless leader here at Spider-Man Crawlspace, contacted me, and we did an interview here at my home, looking at my collection, and I was sharing my stories about collecting Spider-Man over the years. And we had so much fun with that after the show, I was talking to Brad, and I said, if I can ever help out with the crawl space, please let me know. I'd love to contribute. And he had the brilliant idea of bringing me back from time to time to talk about Spidey Stash. So this is our very first episode, and hopefully there will be many to come. As always, I'd like you to feel free to contact me or contact the crawl space and suggest anything that you'd like to see or like to hear about or like to see featured in Spidey Stash. Or any questions that you have, please forward them on, and I'll give you my contact information at the end of the show here today. So let's get right into it. Behind me, you see this beautiful poster. John Romita art, signed by John Romita. And here is the item that it came from. The 1972 Spider-Man A Rockcomic record album. And there's a picture of John signing it there for me when I had the chance to visit with John at his home about a year and a half ago. So that's our topic this week. In this episode, we're going to talk about the Rockcomic and all kind of cool stuff about the Rockcomic. So let's get started. I've got a PowerPoint for us to look at, some photos, and I'll be sharing some information as we go along. What you're seeing on the screen right now is an icon that Brad created for me, and that's the Spidey Stash icon that we'll be using on the website from now on. So that was cool that Brad did that for me, and he is the man, Brad Douglas, our fearless leader here at Spider-Man Crawlspace. And here is the beautiful cover of the album, The Amazing Spider-Man A Rockcomic. And that cover was signed for me by John Romita, as I mentioned, and it's hanging on my wall here in my Spidey room. This album is very near and dear to my heart. When I was a youngster, about 9 years old, this album was becoming available. I got it in 1973. It was released in 1972 by the Buddha record company, and I picked my copy up in 1973. And you can see over the last year or so, my interest in the Rockcomic has really exploded. As many years as I've had it and have enjoyed it, this past year, I really got excited about trying to get a whole bunch of different variants. There's so many different labels out there on their LPs. There's different items to purchase. And I just really got excited about it over the last year. And I think it really started maybe even a year and a half ago. And if I have to lay the blame on someone, I'm going to point the finger at Mr. Ron Frenz, the wonderful and extraordinary artist that we all love around here. He was digging into some of the questions about the Rockcomic back in 2019 in the summertime. And I saw that on his Facebook page, and it got me more interested in the Rockcomic again, but I'll talk more about Ron Frenz and his involvement later on. But as you can see, over the last year or so, my collection has really exploded with Rockcomic items. And you can see I've got LPs, I've got 45 records in there, the small ones. I've got some 8-tracks, and I even have some other memorabilia at the top of the screen that I'll talk about some more. Some of those are promotional kits and other magazines and so forth that had to do with the Rockcomic. Okay, so I've really gotten into it here the last year or so. And there's an earlier picture of just my LPs, and there's a cool one at the top of the center. It's a picture disc that was released in 1988. It wasn't in the original release, and it was released over in the UK, but it's a really nice piece, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later on as well. But right now I have 20 LPs in my house and probably 12 different labels. I've got some, doubles or triples of some of them, but I'm trying to get every different label that I can possibly find, and I'm really educating myself as I go. I don't know if anyone else has that many labels sitting around in their house with their rock comic collection, or if they even know about it. So I'm educating myself, and I'm trying to get the word out there to anybody else that might be interested in the rock comics, to let them know what's going on with all these different variants. And there's been many tributes to the rock comic over the years. Even recently, on the left there, you see Alex Ross. He did a rendition of the rock comic cover, and he released it as a limited print at some Comic Cons and through his website. And as you can see, they also did a variant cover to a recent edition of the Amazing Spider-Man comic book. On the left is the Alex Ross cover. On the right is the John Romita lenticular cover that they placed over top of the Alex Ross. And also over in the right-hand frame with the Romita items, there's a magazine at the bottom. It's called Cream, C-R-E-E-M, and it was America's only rock and roll magazine, as they advertised it back then. And I'll talk about the Cream magazine again, but it has something to do with the rock comic as well. All right, and as I said, a lot of places are paying tribute to the rock comic, even the toy companies. And back in the 70s, there weren't many products coming out yet in the early 70s. And whenever the rock comic finally came out, the floodgates were starting to open as far as merchandising goes with Marvel Comics. And of course, Spider-Man was their flagship character. So they went ahead and tried to pump out as much as they could with these toy companies. They would get the license from Marvel and put out various items. And this company in particular, the one you see on the screen there, at the bottom, you see it a little bit bigger. It was called AHI for short. It stood for Azrak Hamway International, AHI. And they put out quite a few different Spider-Man items in the 70s, but they took their liberties with the artwork, let's say that. They didn't hire John Romita. They didn't pay for his artwork. Somebody in-house at the AHI company tried to imitate the rock comic, but didn't do such a good job. You can tell that they really enjoyed that image and thought it was a dramatic image, and they used it with their Spider Copter, again, another AHI product, official Spider-Man Spider Copter, and the official Spider-Man stunt cycle with the same kind of artwork that has like probably extra muscles that the human body doesn't have along the shoulders and arms of those figures. But don't forget, there's even knockoffs of the bad art. And this one doesn't have AHI written on it anywhere. They're a knockoff of AHI, and it was a flashlight, I think only available over in Europe somewhere. Of course, we had some of the better quality images on t-shirts and tank tops, and I wore some proudly back in the 1973, 1974 era, 9-10-year-old boy, and I enjoyed wearing those shirts back then. So it definitely had an impact as far as the artwork went. And the first place that I discovered it was in the issues of a FOOM magazine. FOOM, Friends of Old Marvel. It was their in-house fan club. You had to mail in your money to join and get a membership kit, and you would start getting these magazines quarterly at your home. And I missed out on issue number 1 somehow, but I jumped in on issue number 2 when I was 9 years old. And lo and behold, at the very next to the last page of the magazine, there was a full page ad. There it was, big and bold, Spider-Man had his own record. And it was special pricing for FOOM members only. You can see the pricing there at the bottom. I begged my mother to send in a money order, and she not only sent in a money order for that album, but earlier in the issue was the first chance to buy the Spider-Man bronze medallion. So she sent them in for both of those things. And it seemed like forever. The medallion came and the album didn't. So I kept complaining to my mother, and she wrote an angry letter to Marvel, and lo and behold, my record showed up pretty close to 2 weeks after that angry letter was sent. So I finally had the LP, and I started playing it like crazy all over my house, singing along and dancing as a 9-year-old. And here's that Cream magazine I was talking about. As you can see, the blurb at the top says America's only rock and roll magazine. And it was released around April of 1973. And I was going to the comic shops, you know, picking up my comics and candy and whatnot as a youngster. And I happened to look over at the regular magazine rack, and I saw this one, and I saw the beautiful John Romita artwork, and I grabbed it, and it has some cool articles about Marvel, but the reason that they were in the Rock and Roll magazine to begin with, you can see the big record album in the background behind Spider-Man, was because of the Rock comic connection and the fact that it had just hit the stores and was for sale. So recently I was able to pick up that beautiful artwork on the right-hand side. That's John Romita's preliminary artwork for the cover. And I'm very blessed to have that in my collection now, and I really treasure it. And I'm going to have these two items framed together and put up on my wall very soon. So that's the Rock comic connection. And inside the Rock comic, there was this mail-away ad for the Spider-Man album, and you had to pay more money. Yeah, the FOOM members got it for $3. Here's $4.98 plus 35 cents for postage. But that was an ad right in the Rock comic or right in the Cream magazine for the Rock comic. What you see here, as they were promoting these things, they would have promotional kits that they would send out to the radio stations and some maybe to the record stores as well, so that they could advertise and get excited about the Rock comic and selling it and playing it on the radio so people will go out and buy it. And those are pieces from my kit that I own. You can see there's a folder down in the bottom middle, and a 45 came with it, and a poster, and some letters, and some decorations, and window displays, and things like that. And there was also in the stores a giant, well, at least somewhat large, counter display. It was made out of hard cardboard, and it would have like a tripod built into it in the back, and that would be sitting on the record counter, maybe up by the cash register or something like that, somewhere in the store, to advertise the wonderful Rock comic. And here's someone else's kit with a couple more pieces in it. They sent out a comic, a current comic at the time, and some other stickers and things like that to promote it. And there's the beautiful folder that it all came in, a nice, slick paper, and had pockets in it so that the items could stay in there nicely. Let's talk about the album itself. In addition to the wonderful artwork on the cover, John Romita did an entire episode of 5 different strips there. And you can see there's no dialogue on it, but the dialogue was on the record. So if you haven't heard it yet, I would highly recommend picking one up or going on to YouTube or somewhere and listening to it. You can get these LPs if you still have a record player somewhere. The LPs aren't that expensive, and hopefully you can find one that's not all scratched up so you can listen to it. But John Romita, in interviews, he was kind of funny about his work on this album. He said he was rushed. He was approached to do it, and he was kind of rushed to do the artwork. And he said on the cover, he accidentally left some blue lines on some of the webbing areas. And if you look closely, you might see some of those. But I don't see them, but he said he's very embarrassed about that. But the other unique thing about his artwork is in the middle here, this was a gatefold cover that opened up both sides of the album. And he not only did the pencils and inks, which was his specialty in the comics, he also did the coloring for the first time ever. He was not known as a colorist. So this was his first venture into coloring his own artwork. So that's kind of cool that he did that on this record album. And yes, about, maybe between 25 to 28 years ago, I was visiting a friend who has a large art collection. And yes, he had the original art to those strips. And at the time, I enjoyed the Rock comic, ever since I was a child. I wasn't really collecting as heavily as I am now and didn't have 20 albums in my house, but I appreciated that artwork so much that out of all the artwork that he was showing me when I visited him, this was the only thing I took photos of for some reason, sitting there in front of me on his kitchen table. Very large art. It just impressed me so much, and I loved that Rock comic as a child. And I just snapped a couple quick pictures of the original artwork. So there you are, people, the original artwork to the strips. And let's talk about the music itself. The music and the people that were the characters, the actors, the voice actors. Some of the voice actors are pretty famous, but take a look at the top of this poster. This is actually the poster that comes inside. On the back side of the poster is where they have the credits for who appeared on the LP and who did the music and so forth. And if you look at the top, though, there's something that kind of I had forgotten about, or maybe didn't even pay that much attention to. But when I started researching a little bit more to do this episode of Spidey Stash, if you look there where it says From Beyond the Grave, it says the first of a series of rock comics. The first of a series. So it sounds like they planned to do other characters, and they never did. This was the only one. So I'd be interested to hear any stories. If anyone out there knows of any characters they had ready to go or hoping to do, it would be kind of cool to know which ones they would have done. But anyway, let's take a look at some of the cast members as we get a little closer there. The Kingpin, Thayer David, he was a well-known actor, and the one role that I'm more familiar with, he's an actor from the era before my time, really, but he was in the first Rocky movie as the fight promoter. The one that was kind of like rude to Rocky and didn't care about what color his trunks were in the promotional materials and things like that. He was just trying to make that money. And also Peter Parker, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Rene Auberjonois, also known as Odo in Deep Space Nine. And he was also a character on Benson. If you're a Benson fan from the late 70s, early 80s, he was on there. But he was a great actor, great voice of Peter Parker. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But it's kind of cool that he was involved with this LP as well. And you can see right beneath his name, it says featuring music by the Web Spinners. The Web Spinners is the band name, but the Web Spinners is really just one man, pretty much, Ron Dante. Ron Dante, he's most famous, of course, for the Archies. He was the man who did the Archies records, but he was the one that did all the music. Now, like I said, this was on the poster that comes inside of your rock comic when you buy it brand new, and some of them still have them when you buy them, used. But the thing about it is there's even variants to the posters. I'm finding all these variants. And you can see down below on this screen, it says art by John Romita. Well, on the next screen is another poster of mine, and it included Spinner of the Web, Ron Dante. So it didn't mention Ron on the other poster. So there's even variants of the posters out there, people. So I'm pretty much of a completist, and if I can find some variants, I go nuts trying to get those things. And I was able to communicate with Ron Dante, coincidentally, this summer. Through the internet, and I asked him about his time working on the rock comic, and he told me that he did the main vocals first, then he went back and recorded the backup vocals, and he did it all in one night in a studio in New York City, all in one night. But he was very proud of his time that he put into and his efforts on this rock comic, and he also said he always enjoyed reading the Spider-Man comic books in the early days of Spider-Man. So there you have it, Ron Dante. All right, with the promos, they would send them to record stations, and they would have them marked. As you can see, that little red arrow, I put this on extra. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, which episode to play, just to build up some excitement so that people would go to the record stores and buy them. Okay, now what's cool about this, it's the size of a 45, a small record, but over on the right there, you see where I underlined 33 1/3 RPM. So it's the size of a 45, but it was a slower speed like an album. So record stations wouldn't have too much trouble playing them and changing up the speeds, I guess. So that's just a cool promo spot for 45 shaped, but 33 1/3 speed. Now here comes some of the variants. All right, hang on to your seats there, people. Buddha Records, the main or most common, I think, label is like this maroon colored one. This one was a promotion copy, not for sale. And some of them, were just sent out to radio stations or record stores to promote. Now, this one was a regular copy available for sale. And you can see where they have like the copyrights down near the Buddha's head. And there's some words and other copyrights down across the Buddha's belly. And on the next screen, though, there's nothing across the belly this time, just up by his head this time. And there's one with nothing except side B and some strange numbers off to the side that represent really the item number of the record as far as the Buddha company was concerned. But even just the common variety, there's a few different, variations to that maroon one. Then we get into the psychedelic ones, folks. We get into like kaleidoscope, and there's a light colored kaleidoscope. There's a darker, more colorful, And this one, if you notice on the right-hand side of the center hole, has the word stereo in real big letters, you know, fancy stereo, because you can get some of these records in stereo and some of them just were mono back then. Now here's similar, but stereo is written a little bit differently. You see, so I'm such a completist that I'm catching on to all these different variations. This one is a record label from the UK. So it's a black label, and most of these were found, you know, distributed in the UK. And here's one, light pink colored. And this one, as you see across the bottom, manufactured in Canada. So this one was a Canadian release. Okay. And that's about it for the LPs, you know, that I wanted to show you the variants. But let's talk about some 45s. And even the 8-tracks are up there on the right. The 8-tracks are pretty cool. I was young enough to have 8-tracks, but I never bought any and never had an 8-track player. But I picked up those two this summer for my collection. Supposedly, they were also cassettes of this rock comic. I haven't found any yet, but I know some collectors that have them in their collection, and I'd like to see some photos of those. The 45s, you can see it's the same cover as the album, the LP, but there's a couple variants there. In the top middle, I have a red arrow by the one that says Web Spinners Going Cross Town. That one was from Germany, and that sleeve that it's in is like a plain paper sleeve. All the other ones, you can see a little bit of shine on them. They have a little bit of a coating on them, a fancier paper. And the one at the bottom right of the screen, it also includes the words Web Spinners in the top right section, and the other ones do not. So there's a couple different, you know, variants of even the 45s. And like I said, I'm learning more every day when I go looking for these things. There's an up-close version of the Going Cross Town. That's another one of the cool songs on the rock comic right there, people. Going Cross Town. And here's what some of them look like up close. This one was not for sale. This was as you can see, not for sale on it. Those are the promotional ones. And that one is another one made in Germany. It says right down there in the bottom of the circle. And here's another one. This one has a very unique numbering system over on the left, 610.009J. I'm finding out all these numbers, and I'm trying to get them all. And this one, you know, was a unique coloring, and that was one made in France. And there's another one from the UK with the black label. All right, and now trivia time. Again, thanks to Ron Friends, about a year and a half ago, going on 2 years now, he brought it up on his Facebook account that he was trying to figure out who messed up the famous Spider-Man quote. The famous Spider-Man quote. He wanted to know because it got messed up on the medallion back in 1972. It got messed up a couple different places, even in the movies. Because if you look at this panel, this is the last panel of Amazing Fantasy 15. And at the very top, it says, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. And it's been butchered over the years, and it's been shortened to, with great power comes great responsibility. So Ron was eagle-eyed about that, and he was trying to figure out, when was it altered? When was it even said again after Amazing Fantasy 15? And when did it get attributed to Uncle Ben? Because in the movies, of course, you know, Uncle Ben is the one that said it. But as you can see in Amazing Fantasy 15, he just became aware of it. It didn't say that Uncle Ben had anything to do with it. So Ron Friends did some researching, and some of us were jumping in on it too. And as near as we can tell, the very first time it was attributed to Uncle Ben was, yes, on the Rock comic. On the Rock comic, it's attributed to Uncle Ben. I don't want to be a spoiler of the Rock comic, but you guys that haven't heard it yet, you know, get out there and hear it. But, so that's your trivia for today, that Ron Friends, thanks to him and others, he was digging around, and he found out that it was actually good old Rock comic that allowed us to see that where it was attributed to Uncle Ben. Originally, it was not. Okay. So anyway, I want to show you a couple of things up close, and then we'll close our time together. All right. Right on the camera here, if you can see it, I'll try to get it so it doesn't glare too much for you. there is the 8-track. And they were pretty thick if you're not familiar with them. And the 8-track tapes, because there's the ribbon inside the tape. And you don't want that to break or get tangled, or there goes your music, there goes your record, there goes your stories. Well, there you go. The 8-track. Wonderful. All right, let me teach you a couple things here, maybe if you haven't heard about them. Sometimes you can find these sealed on eBay or other places pretty easily. You know, all sealed up, nice plastic, has a sticker on it, includes the hit single theme from Spider-Man and a huge full-color poster. Yeah, it does. Those things are wonderful. Sometimes, though, you'll notice that maybe, and the buyer might, or the seller might even mention it, it has a notch cut. Can you see the notch cut? It's like cut a little notch in it, and it doesn't hurt the record. It doesn't hurt the poster. But what I've been told is that when record stores couldn't sell some of their stock and they had to send it back for credit, that either the store or probably the record company, when they got these back returned, they'd put a little notch in it to indicate that, and then they would sell them maybe cheaper, or wholesale them out to people. Okay, kind of like the comic books back in the old days. If they didn't sell in the newsstands, the owner of the newsstand could get credit for it. They sent it back, and the companies that they sent it back to would tear off the cover, and they'd put them in 3 or 4 or 5 multi-packs and seal them up in a bag and try to sell them for cheaper, in different outlets back then. So that's what a notch cut is. It might be at the top, it might be along the edge somewhere, it might be on the bottom. It does reduce the value a little bit, at least in my opinion. So if you can find one sealed without a notch cut, I think that's more valuable. But if you're going to listen to it, it doesn't matter about the notch cut. All right. If you're looking for one of those promotional ones where it says not for sale, promotional copy, here's one quick way. If no one is able to show you the label for sure on the record, this works, I would say, almost 100% of the time. Do you see this hole in the top right, or the top right corner up here? See this? It's almost a perfect hole punch, perfect circle hole punch. And instead of a notch cut, these have this hole punch in it. And anytime I've seen one of these hole punches and I've gotten the album, it's always been a promotional copy. So if you're looking for a promotional copy, that's a good telltale sign. Now you might be able to get some without that as well, but if you see that hole, that round hole, you're most likely going to get yourself a promotional copy. Okay. Here's that picture disc that was released in the UK. It's kind of cool. It's shiny, and that's the actual album. You play the album. That's side A, and you flip it over, and there's side B with the wonderful artwork from the back of the album. John Romita at his finest, people. That was some powerful artwork, and I love the story as well. So if you haven't heard it yet, go out there and get yourself one. All right, get yourself one. Typical album, right? No, this one's not a typical album. The typical one, when you opened it up, yeah, you saw the beautiful John Romita artwork. You followed along in the story as you listened to the record. There'd be a story, then there'd be a song, then there'd be a story. All the episodes are on there. And typically what happens is then the record album itself was located right along that back edge of the second half of the album. But not this one. This is from Canada. This is a special edition. Canada version, the back cover itself opened the whole way up. And inside there is where the record album was. And there's the pink label I talked about earlier. Super pink label. So a different system of how they package their record. And the front cover is very, very thin and light compared to a typical cover. And one of my friends had this in his collection. Not this very one that I have. He still has it in his collection. But he tried to explain it to me without showing me a video, and I really couldn't understand it. Oh well. Until I saw it myself and experienced it, and then I could see what the difference was. Okay. Inside of the Japanese version, you have this beautiful item. It's almost like a 4 or 5 page booklet, and every word of the dialogue of the different characters are in there, in English and in Japanese. So if you want to read along, you read along and you can be one of the characters. So that's kind of cool. Came with the Japanese version. And the Japanese version, it had a little bit of a different number for the record itself right there. I don't know if you can see that very well or not, but try to get it in there for you. Okay. A little bit different wording and different numbering system. And that was the Japanese version. Sorry about the glare. I'm going to be putting up some photos along with this video in the article, so you'll be able to check it out. And there's the Japanese version. A little bit different icon at the bottom of the record right there. A little different icon. Same great artwork. And the same across the back. Beautiful artwork. The Rockcomic. So, like I said, the Rockcomic was very near and dear to my heart. The music, maybe not your cup of tea out there as far as music goes, but it's a fun record. It really set the bar, you know, to me at least. The other records that didn't have music on them and just had the story, it just didn't cut it for me because I was spoiled by that Rockcomic and the bar that it set with all that music on it. So I'm very thankful that John Romita did the artwork, one of the most awesome artists of all time. And I'm very thankful that Ron Dante did the music. And I'm very thankful that Ron Friends got interested in it about 2 years ago, which got me off on my many quests to find all the variants. And if you have any questions about the Rockcomic, please feel free to contact me. You can find me, Bruce Wechtenhiser, on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I'm known as Spidey Collector on Instagram. And you can find me right here on the crawl space and get a hold of me here as well. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode about the Rockcomic. It's one of my most favorite items in my collection. And if you haven't gotten it yet, go out and get yourself one. And I hope that you tune in again next time. God bless.